All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samu?
Well, we got a couple things on the initial docket, and then maybe we can end with some fun. Maybe end with some fitness or
Okay.
sexy time with Sam or something like that, if we have time. Uh, but I want to make a couple bold predictions, and in order to do that, we have to talk a little bit about the COVID issue, specifically Omicron, and uh, and the inoculations. And then we also have to talk a little bit about the racial tension in the United States. And actually, this goes worldwide. And this is, I kind of want to sandwich it a little bit because I want to start with the racial part, then we'll talk COVID, and then we'll go back to the racial part because we have elections coming up. And these things tend to all go hand in hand. You seem to see them in cycles, and they happen to coincide with the election cycles. Maybe that should at least make you take a step back before you react. But I heard this from oh shit, what's her name? She is the CEO of Skin and Skin. Skin is Skin, which is a company that's based here in the United States, but is trying to build up wealth in Senegal. And she also has a non-for-profit that is designed to talk to the governments in Africa about opening up free trade.
This was on a recent Peterson podcast, right?
This was on a recent Peterson podcast. Let me get her name real quick. This way. I'm going back here. Here we go. Hopefully no sound comes through. Magate Wade is her name. She's from Senegal. Then she lived in France, and then she moved to the States and worked in Silicon Valley. And all of a sudden had an epiphany that this was the answer to bringing about wealth to her home country in Senegal. And I heard it from her, but she credited someone else. I can't remember the name. And then I also heard it credited to actually Ben Shapiro. So good on him if he's the original quote here. But the paraphrase of the quote is, I would gladly trade a few million millennials from here, a few million white millennials from the United States for a few million Black entrepreneurial, hardworking Africans any day. And I agree with that statement 100%. In fact, I will expand that statement to say, with a few million millennial Gen Z with useless freaking liberal arts or social sciences degrees, they can go live in Africa while those hardworking, entrepreneurial, intelligent African citizens can come here and take their place. And so if you want to call me an ist, it's not based on skin color. It's based on what you do. And I just wanted to open the conversation with that, because you can call me all the names in the book, but it is not racist, quote unquote, against Black people, because I would rather have them than you who will call me a racist for this stuff. So that's I just wanted to open up with that. But now let's talk COVID.
Okay.
After you give your 2 cents.
Well, that's something I've said, and others have said similar sentiments for a long time. That you want people who want to come here because of what America uniquely offered, which was, now who were we listening to who said this when I was down there when we were going fishing, that somewhere along the way the American dream got warped. It got changed from work hard and you can accomplish great things, you can maximize your potential, to you can do anything you want. No, you can't.
That was the guy on intelligence.
Yeah.
Lex Friedman podcast.
Yeah. Which is, something I've used in a different context before, is I love music. I was never good at it. I was a good elementary musician because I reading music was easy for me. It's kind of like math. It's simple. So I could read music, so I could play simple technical things. But I have no creative musical ability. Okay? So no matter how much I want to, I'm not going to Juilliard to learn how to play the cello. It's just not going to happen. Now, if I work really hard, maybe I can get halfway decent at playing it.
To where we're
But
all cool at a party with you going off and doing something. Yeah.
it but but no matter how hard I work, I'm not going to be able to do anything I want.
Well,
All right.
we poop on LeBron James all the time. But even if I started when I was 2, I would never be the forward in the NBA that LeBron James is.
Mhm,
It's just not possible.
mhm.
Uh, maybe I could have been a point guard somewhere, but I still would. Realistically, I would never have been as good as LeBron James.
Yeah.
It's just the facts of life. He is an extremely gifted athlete with a brain to boot, which is why I'm more critical of him for the other stuff, because I know he's smart enough to know what he's saying. But well, even would take our other nemesis we always bring up, Colin Kaepernick. I would never have been the quarterback Colin Kaepernick is. It's You can't be anything you want to be, but you can be something here in the United States.
Yeah.
And
Well, Kaepernick is a great example, and Tebow's another one of a similar type of. All right, you had these great natural athletic gifts, but you didn't have these other things that it took to be a successful NFL quarterback.
Mhm.
Even someone within that fraction of a percent, there's still a fraction within that fraction. So no, even someone like that can't
Remember, the
be
extremes are more
anything.
obvious at the tails.
Yeah.
Cap is in the top 1% of all quarterbacks that have ever played the game, but he's no Warren Moon.
Mhm.
He's no Randall Cunningham. He's no, well, he's no Drew Brees. He's never, I would say he had the potential to be one of those, but
Mhm.
it just wasn't in the cards because of something with him.
Yeah.
And it's not always physical ability. Sometimes it's what drives you and all of those other things. So
And circling back to how we got on this is that people with that work ethic and that entrepreneurial drive, they're not trying to be whatever they want. They're just trying to be something and be the
mhm.
best at it they can be. It's Mike Rowe talks about this all the time is so many I believe the words he uses is the overwhelming majority of the people that he talked to were wealthy business owners, but they're, recycling pig poop to turn it into manure, or they're catching worms to sell them for bait. You didn't set out, that wasn't your childhood dream, but you did it because you found a niche and you worked at it.
Yeah, I wanted to start with that because we are going to talk a touchy subject with which, per the Twitter mob, we're not allowed to talk about. And you can call us all kinds of things, but because I think you agree with me on my statement
Mhm.
of what we would trade, it just doesn't hold water because it is truly, and again, we will get slammed for invoking this, it is truly content of character, not color of skin. And realistically, what we have a problem here is an attitude in the United States. And if that's attached to skin color, that's because there are movements that are keeping it that way.
Mhm.
And those are part of the problem. And to tie that into election cycles, we'll kind of come back to that a little bit later. I wanted to go into Omicron a little bit because it's important going forward. Because the whole debacle with our cabal was all based on the fear of COVID. And one of the things I wanted to go over was why all of a sudden are we seeing Omicron not be Omicron, but be Omicron BA1, Omicron BA2, Omicron BA4, and 5. I don't know what happened to 3. I guess it just didn't compete very well. And then 2.75 is coming out of India, but that's not seeming to compete very well. And so we're seeing all these different subvariants of Omicron. And to give people a visual, bring up my pretty little pictures. There we go. This is a variant chart, and this is the most simple one I could find. So that hub in the middle, that's original Wuhan strand, and all the little offshoots are variants and subvariants going off of that. Now I want and to bring my point home, you can see alpha there. Beta's up here. Now the direction they go is just kind of for visual, but basically a certain number of mutations away from the original causes it to be called a variant. Now that's been slightly arbitrary with the virus, and it's not as simple as, say, a genus, a family, a species with more sentient organisms, because it's pretty easy to say a dog is a species, right? And a poodle can mate with a Labrador, right? So they're still the same species. They're just subspecies within that species. They can mate together. But say a horse can't mate with a cow. So they're completely different species. And it's kind of like, it is a little bit arbitrary in some cases, but that's kind of like the cutoff line. Can I reproduce with another version that's similar to me? No. Okay, we're separate species, right? Now with viruses, it's a little bit different because viruses are asexual, right? They attach to the DNA, or excuse me, to the RNA, and then reproduce, and it comes out a different version that is theoretically exactly like itself. Every once in a while, the mutation. And with billions of replications, that every once in a while happens quite often. Now, the mystery of Omicron was, if you see how alpha came out and then delta kind of came out of a similar thing and beta came out, and the distance from the center is time. So delta over time developed from alpha, or alpha, the same strain that alpha came from, and we kind of mapped it along. Beta came out, but it came out in a linear way. And when you look at Omicron, you see that nice empty line all the way past where delta comes out. And that's the mystery of Omicron, is it came out of nowhere. It had so many mutations. It was a separate variant, but there was no line that we could trace along the way. Lots of theories on this, most of them pretty plausible, but we don't know, and we may never will. The two top for me are the fact that it could have been in an animal host for a while and then pop back out of that animal host into a human again, which would be perfectly fine, because if it doesn't change too much, it's transmissible just like any other disease. But because of where it's from, also the other one that I find most compelling is it came out of South Africa, and it could have gone into the parts of Africa that aren't very well documented, don't have hospitals, don't have all of that, and passed around there for a while. So we might have those dots going down in humans. We just don't know it because it's in a place that we don't track anything. And I would like to see people go out to these tribes and take blood samples and antibody samples to see if we can find a line back. But that's neither here nor there. It is the dominant strain. But why didn't we hear about Delta 21A, Delta 21I, Delta 21J? Because we had Mu, we had Epsilon, we had all of these others on the horizon for people to say, oh, new variants coming, new variants coming, new variants coming. We haven't had that since Omicron. There has been nothing since Omicron as far as a new variant. So what does the news cycle do? Take the subvariants
Yeah.
and keep putting them out there because we need to keep this fresh. We need to keep this going. Oh, BA1. Oh, no, BA2, more contagious. Oh, BA5. Oh, we get a little bit more of a cough with BA5. Oh, BA 2.75 coming out of India. Let's see what that does. It's not advancing like it was in the early days. And so they're resorting to the subvariants to keep the fear going and keep the narrative going. Get your vaccine, get your booster, get your booster, get your booster, get your booster. Oh, we may need to mask up again. Got to close down those schools again. But that's kind of what the direction I wanted to go, because it's all about the narrative. Everything's about the narrative anymore.
And it's not new. The only thing that's new is the speed and the saturation of the information, because you have so many information sources, and yet so many of them go back to single hubs, i.e. big tech or the mainstream media, which is basically, different heads of the same hydra. So it all goes back to a central hub, and then it's so easy to get information that you can have a lot of information and you can saturate that market and bombard people with it. So it is, there's this kind of, for a long while, I don't remember exactly when it first started to come about, but there was this kind of libertarian utopian ideal that escalating technology was going to make people more and more free, and government less and less necessary and less desired. And what we've seen in the West with information control, and in China with people monitoring and tracking, is that the opposite has become true. That the technology has grown to the point where it has actually made it easier to track people and to monitor people and to correct people when they have wrong think.
I just saw the other day the Amazon Ring doorbell was selling information to cops without the user permission. Everything. You've got the Alexa in your little hub in your room, or you've got what's the Apple version? Siri?
Yeah.
Siri in your room. Hey, so Siri, what is this? Well, guess what? If it can hear you say that, it can hear everything else. Okay, so I'm going to put this on record here just in case I get drunk and accidentally do it. I was almost curious enough to just say something completely trying to think of the way to say this without getting us killed, getting us banned. Something that would lead the government to believe I was a dangerous person into my Alexa hub, just to see if cops showed up at my doorstep. And so I'm saying this here because now everybody's on record to say that if I did it, it was because I was hammered and thought it would be funny.
Trying to prove a point about the
trying to prove a point. So if I ever end up in jail as a domestic, then that's what happened. I really am not. I don't even own a gun. I'm not comfortable with them. It's not my thing. I've got a 12-year-old in the house, and we all know what stupid boys do all the time.
Oh yeah.
Even if they're smart. And so it's not a route I want to go down. Although I think one day I'll get a shotgun, because I'm not actually pretty damn good with a shotgun. But it's so if that ever happens, that's really the real story. So people divert the authorities to episode 97.
Yeah. So this is something I've brought up before, and I want to mention it briefly. There is a concept called the moral equivalent of war. And the idea, the phrase, or the idea has probably been around for a while. The phrase came from a guy named William James. And it was an essay he wrote, and I believe it was 1906. And it's one of those odd things because of the way it's been warped, similar to how Nazism stole and warped a lot of Nietzschean philosophy in ways that Nietzsche wouldn't have approved of.
Which, by the way, I've been very pessimistic today, so I put up Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So William James was a pacifist, but he recognized that human nature was human nature and you couldn't make it go away. Just wishing for war to go away was not going to change
Mhm.
the long arc of human history. So his idea was that we create the moral equivalent of war, that rather than drafting young men, boys into military service, we would draft them into public service. And when we would have them, in his words, not wage war against our neighbors, but wage war against nature. So you can kind of see where this is going, because this idea was then taken in the progressive era of the early 1900s by Wilson, and then especially by FDR. This is where the Conservation Corps comes from, and in the Public Works Administration, and all those projects that they used to temporarily put unemployed people to work in the Great Depression. It came from William James. Here's the problem with that, is that if you create a moral equivalent of war, then you create the authority of war. See, we accept certain violations of our basic human rights during war. We accepted, and this was back before we were a bunch of soft, pathetic wimps. But in World War II, we accepted a degree of mail and news censorship. We accepted that the government could draft you and literally put you in front of a firing line. There is no greater violation of your basic human rights than the government forcibly taking you and putting you on the front lines to die. But we accepted that because of the risk calculus, because our very existence, less so for us here in America, but certainly for those in Western Europe, our very existence was at stake. So
yes, you're going down a path that I actually wanted to go down as we progressed. So go ahead and finish your thought, and then we'll come back to it, because you're bringing up a concept that is very important in this conversation, because we can bring it to COVID, we can bring it to the environment, we can bring it to a lot of things, because it's the broad concept is, if we make something an existential risk enough, what are you willing to sacrifice for that, including people?
Yeah.
So go ahead and keep going with your thought.
Well, in World War II, it worked for the most part, and it made sense for the most part, because you had a very direct and understandable objective. You had the Axis military powers. They had to be defeated utterly and unconditionally surrender, and then the emergency was over and we could go back to normal. We would no longer accept these wartime measures. Well, this is where a lot of the Great Depression measures were so controversial, is people started to say, wait a minute, the government doesn't have the authority to do that. But FDR used language to say that
also a direction I wanted to go down.
An economic depression, an economic downturn, if it was severe enough, was cause enough for the government to take greater power, as if it was a war. And we see that continuing and continuing and continuing. And of course, the danger with COVID was, wait a minute, you people are declaring public health emergencies and assuming temporary powers that have no limit. How can something be a temporary emergency act or authority or power or measure if there's no expiration date? To that point, we've been doing this for 2.5 years now, and there haven't been expiration dates. There haven't been legislatures coming in to codify or to strike down governors or attorneys general or whoever assuming this authority. But if you terrify people enough with the COVID variants, or with monkeypox, or now with climate change as an existential threat and we're all going to die, then you can take the extreme authority of war, and you really need to contemplate what that means.
Okay, so this was not going to be something I went into, but I've been going over the platforms for the Texas Republican and Texas Democratic Party, and this is in the Republican platform. We oppose all executive orders, whether by president, a governor, or a local official that go beyond administration of executive authority and have the effect of legislation. We call upon the Texas legislature or local lawmakers to nullify such executive orders. And I think that goes right into what you were saying.
Mhm.
It's this overreach based on it's an emergency. We're all going to die.
Mhm.
Oh, the world will end in 10 years if we don't do this, which we've been hearing since 1980. At least I've been hearing since 1980 because that's as long as I've been alive. It's probably been going on before that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's what will we do? Gosh, I kind of wanted to get to this a little bit later, but it's an important point. What are we willing to do because in air quotes, greater good?
Mhm.
And apparently, according to what's been going down, a lot.
Yeah. And we're not that far removed from the debate over the Patriot Act. So think about that, because whichever side of the aisle you're on, think about what all the government got away with, whether legislatively or because it just did it, like the NSA. It just did it. Why? Because we had a threat, but it was a more ephemeral threat, and it was open-ended, kind of like how the government was able to do a lot of things during the Cold War because it was cold. Yes, we opposed expansion by the USSR and the spread of communism, but what does that mean? How is that defined? What's the start point? What's the end point? Same thing with the war on terror. Terrorism has been around for a very long time, and it's not going away. So the war on terror, the war on an idea, is something that's never really going to go away. And people on the left rightly said the Patriot Act is a bad idea, and were incensed when they criticized, or when they were criticized for criticizing the government measures, with the right saying, oh, you're being unpatriotic. And the right was wrong then, and the left was right. And then you fast forward a little bit, and all of a sudden, during the Obama administration, it comes out how the Patriot Act is being used and abused. And now all of a sudden, people on the right are going, oh, wait a minute, this is a bad idea. Yeah, it was a bad idea then.
Mhm.
It's a bad idea now. And now both sides ought to be able to say, oh, yeah, see, I told you so. Yeah, you were right. Let's fix this. No, because we have to play team jersey party politics.
Well, the same thing that went on with the Wolverine group in Michigan is exactly what's been going on with just small Muslim groups across the country for the last since the Patriot Act came out. They just basically flipped the script. It was okay. We're fighting terrorism.
Mhm.
Let's just make it these yokels instead of somebody from the Middle East. That's all they did. All they had to do was just change who they did it to. Okay, we're gonna have to come back to this because it's all
Okay.
important. But we gotta put a little backdrop. So we're doing a flashback here.
Okay.
My bold prediction. Well, I guess we're talking into the future, but flashback into the future. Come on, Michael J. Let's get this going. So we've got the fact that we keep pushing COVID, we keep pushing vaccines. I don't think it's going to happen in this election cycle, the 2022, but I do think it's going to happen in 2024 because we've got another 2 years for things to change. And they're already starting to flip the narrative a little bit. It's been too long since the race debate has been in the news. And this part of it is going to take a little longer, although there's that thing with the Muppets, but I don't know if you've seen that. The Muppets are Sesame Street is getting sued because of the guy in the suit that wouldn't high five the little black kids. But $25 million, I think it is, for
Yikes.
for pain and suffering because they didn't get a high five. But once this kind of clears over and they kind of separate themselves from the inoculations, and there's quite a bit of gaslighting to the public that they didn't just try to shove this shot down our throat, and hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers didn't lose their jobs, and all of the infrastructure problems that we're having, which is causing inflation, which actually emboldened Russia, and
the military is being purged.
Yeah, military is being purged.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things that they're going to pretend didn't happen. Remember our episode that's not on YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
There was a certain thing about that episode which actually is true, because it's just a numbers game.
Mm-hmm.
If a certain segment of the population is inherently younger and something affects younger people more, then it is going to affect that segment of the population more.
Yeah.
And that segment of the population happens to be Black Americans.
And you can find that episode on Rumble.
You can find it on Rumble. It is labeled exactly how you would think it would be labeled. And I'm not going to say it out loud here because that might go in the algorithm. We'll call it discriminatory inoculations. You change that into more harsh words. Discriminatory inoculations. But I have a feeling, and this is my prediction, that come around 2024, the whole systemic racism thing is going to pop back into the picture. And that's going to be part of it, because it will affect that population more. And not in the way that I brought up with the age adjusted numbers before. No, this is real numbers. This is, you just calculate how many people were affected.
Mm-hmm.
It is, if mandates and basically the fear mongering to get people to do it keep going through, then it will affect that population more. And to me, that's racist. But it's also just a power grab, because they know it's going to happen. The people these people are smarter than me. Okay. They do statistics better than me. They know medicine better than me, and I can see it. So if they can't see it, they're either willfully blind or doing it on purpose. One of the two.
What I'm curious about is how fast will that shift happen if Trump is the Republican nominee?
Well,
because we've already seen them do it. Go back in the Wayback Machine, people, and remember that in late 2019, when this was first getting started, November, December, and then kind of January, when it was first getting started, and Trump instituted the travel ban, kind of minimal travel ban for China. Democrat politicians were out on the streets during Chinese New Year celebrations, urging people to go out and not to be swayed by racist Trump's fear mongering. And these same people were saying, if we got a vaccine under Trump, they wouldn't trust it and they wouldn't take it because they don't trust Trump. And the script completely flipped when it was politically expedient. Well, how quickly will the script flip if Trump is the nominee?
And I think you might be going the same direction I'm going, because remember who started Warp Speed?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because he has still been out there, despite the fact that his base doesn't like it. In what appearances and rallies he has been doing, he has been touting Warp Speed as his big achievement. They said it couldn't be done. I did it. He's been touting it.
And not only that, though, this is where I'm torn on something. The political elite are the problem, but there is a benefit to having political elite. Mm-hmm. Trump was an outsider, and Warp Speed was what set up the machine we have going now, which the other side just jumped on because they all of a sudden had power, right? And they thought that was the way to more power. But Warp Speed was what got this started. And I think it was ignorance on his part. He didn't understand the fact that Warp Speed cut off everything else. So when he came out and said, oh, we should be promoting HCQ, he didn't know that warp speed got in the way of HCQ. And warp speed got in the way of ivermectin, or warp speed got in the way of all treatment in the United States. And it might be because if you look at the difference in numbers of deaths with us and every other developed country in the world, and even compared to underdeveloped countries, 75% maybe of deaths, because the treatment plan was go home, stay away from people until you need a ventilator. And by the time you need a ventilator, you're almost gone. And it was warp speed that started all of that. Sorry, Republicans. So all of you that wanted IVM, and all of you that wanted HCQ, and all of you that wanted all these alternate treatments, guess what? Your guy started it. And I do believe it was out of ignorance. So I will give him that credit, because, and the only reason I give him that credit is because he started promoting other stuff. And I think if it was out of maliciousness, or out of this is my legacy, or out of just arrogance, I think he would have known better than to promote the other stuff, because he's not a stupid guy. So I think it was out of ignorance of the process and the fact that the EUAs needed it to be the only option.
Yeah, and his failure to recognize that is why he's slipping in polls of the Republican base,
which is a good thing.
And DeSantis is climbing.
I did hear Justin Amash might be the Libertarian candidate coming forward. That's exciting. He's actually really cool. Yeah. Because it was this Dave Smith guy for a long time, and he was polling really well, but he's not to offend anybody out there, but he's a Zelensky is what he is. He's an actor comedian that just wants a little bit of fame. I've listened to him talk a few times, and he wants to smoke pot and be famous is what he is. But Justin Amash, he's a sharp dude.
Yeah. He's actually well-grounded philosophically, and is good at espousing the libertarian ideal, explaining why he finds it the best,
shit ton
philosophy.
Better than the last two.
Yeah.
Big time. Joe Jorgensen, and was it Gary Johnson?
Yeah, Gary Johnson, the former New Mexico governor. Yeah,
Gary Johnson, I brought myself to vote for, but Joe Jorgensen, every time I heard her in an interview, long form interview, she had nothing. It was just word salad every time.
Well, what else you got?
So I made my predictions. I kind of made them both at once, because my second prediction would be the 2024 elections.
Well, that prediction is why I've been saying and thinking that these recent laptop leaks, and the fact that Hunter's laptop is finally getting a little bit of mainstream coverage, is to force Joe out so that Kamala becomes president, and then she's running as an incumbent, and then they'll put some Rainbow Mafia person as her VP.
Well,
so that they tick both those boxes, and make the 2024 election all about discrimination, LGBT discrimination, and Black racial discrimination. They will have nothing else that they're running on except that.
Well, and this is the plea, because we opened up this episode with where our biases and where our actual judgment lies, and it has nothing to do with a certain skin tone. It has to do with behavior, and it has to do with what your meaning for yourself and society is like, because they both go together. You can't have one without the other and live in a country, right? It's kind of a plea to think. I'm trying to put this in a very, because the worst thing you want to say to somebody, think of somebody who's in a bad relationship. You can give them all the truths about that person that you want.
Yeah.
And they're going to double down and get entrenched and push you away to the point where you can't talk until it's too late for them. And I think that's what's been happening with this certain community for a long time. uh, it's kind of a given that what we call minority voters will vote Democrat in the majority of them. But you look at the Hispanic polling numbers right now, the approval rating for Biden is like 19%.
Well, you don't even have to look at those polling numbers. You can look at poll results. So for instance, something that is very little reported on because it breaks the narrative is the demographic breakdowns of Obama's election in 2008. Now, obviously, he got a huge percentage of Black and Hispanic votes. That's not the point. The point is, while he got those votes personally, those same voters, the majority vote of them voted for very conservative ballot issues.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, people have forgotten about Prop 8, which was an amendment to the California Constitution codifying marriage as traditional heterosexual one man, one woman, and then civil unions do whatever you want. But marriage was codified in the state constitution with an amendment that was on the ballot, and it was passed, and it was passed in large measure because all of those minority voters that Obama brought to the polls didn't vote with him on that issue or any of those issues. And that's, you can find that across the 50 states in various ballot issues, that it was all about connection, that the Republican Party has done a terrible job connecting with. Because going to your analogy, if you just bring in the facts and figures of why this person is no good for you, that person is going to shut you off because they have an emotional connection, however toxic, to that person you're denigrating. You have got to create an emotional connection with them, make sure they fully understand and believe that you care about them, and then break the emotional connection that's toxic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that emotional connection is a lot of times because of a picture painted for you.
Mm-hmm.
So a narcissist in a relationship will basically love bomb you in the beginning. So you get this special feeling about it. And then when things start going bad, you hold on to that feeling so much. And then when that starts to fade, they love bomb you again, right? Unless they're done with you, then they just leave, right? And then they just go on their own way. But in this case, they need you because you're those votes. You're that. Okay, so Trump got more of the African-American vote than any other Republican candidate for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still in the teens, right? It's still less than 80%. What is it, like 12 or 13, somewhere around there?
Yeah.
Which was double any Republican.
The
in
fact that
history,
he broke double digits was a big deal.
Yeah. So this is the only group voting in lockstep, other than college professors, which is like in the 90-somethings% in one direction. But that's a different subject, because what does Scad say? It takes an academic to be this stupid.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the one group that votes in lockstep, and we bring in the Kaepernicks and stuff, and just look at the message that they're putting forward, that you have this thing inside you that makes you a certain way. And when we talk about who's the racist, right? You've got this message that's being sent to you, that you have this thing inside you that makes you different, and that makes you not able to live in this place as it is. Or you've got a whole group of people that are saying you can be not anything you want to be, but you can improve yourself if you do X, Y, Z, because this is real life. Which one of those is the racist? That's the question. You have this thing about you that you can't change because of the color of your skin makes you this way, or these are the problems that we face in life, and these are the things you're doing at the moment that don't fit that mold, and this is how it gets better. that's kind of the message I'm trying to put forward here. And this rosy picture is being put in front of you that this thing exists. And why this ties into COVID is not just what I just brought up with my prediction. It's the fact that the entities that are bringing forward this are trying to convince you of this narrative using their expert authority. Does that make sense?
Well, they're also trying to balkanize people with this issue. It's the same playbook. It's, very quickly wearing a mask became a designator of how much you care and where you stand on the issue. Posting in your social media profiles your vaccination status, it is the same as turning your profile picture rainbow flagged or the Ukrainian flag or whatever. It is a signal to create partisan divides for creating votes.
So this is, if you can see my browser there.
CDC. Oh no, that's dangerous.
Oh no, yeah. Everything there's a pattern here. If you really want to break into it, and if you're, I know we've got a small audience. There's no denying that. We're not arrogant enough to think we can reach millions of people, but that's fine. That's okay. But if we reached you, you can reach someone else or two other people, and those two other people can reach four, and those four can reach six. We can keep going down that road. There's a story being told to you, and and this is where I get into it, because they're putting it under the guise of actual scientific analysis, right?
Yeah.
So this looks like a scientific paper, right? Perceived racism and demographic, mental health, and behavioral characteristics among high school students during COVID-19 pandemic. All right. So if you're a teacher, you're going to look at this and go, wow, I need to pay attention to this, right? Or if you're a social worker who deals with adolescents, you're going to be like, wow, I need to pay attention to this. A psychologist, or go down the list of all of these things. This right here paints a picture that racism is so bad in schools that it's destroying people's mental health and making it to where these people can't succeed.
Well, actually, no, what they're saying there is worse, because
I'm being nice.
They are implicitly telling you that there isn't actually racism. It's just perceived.
We're going to get
because
to that.
these people have been so inundated that now, whether or not there was an actual act of racism doesn't matter, because if an adolescent perceives racism, then that is an issue that we have to address.
Okay, so we didn't script this person, so anybody in the audience, and he said some stuff that I'm like, gosh, we're going to get to that. He brought up language. And Konstantin Kisin, in a recent interview on Rogan, and it's not a direct quote, but it's pretty damn close, because I was writing it as I heard it, and then I was trying to remember it as I found a pad to write it on. Changing language changes laws without legislation. Because if you change the meaning of words, and those words are in the legal system, you actually change the law. And you don't do it through legislation, you do it through Merriam-Webster.
This is what I've been ranting about with Title IX and trans stuff.
So racism, defined as a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks, i.e. race, that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities, unfairly advantages other individuals and communities, and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. So if I was to ask you, well, maybe not you, because we've been talking about this a while, but if I was to ask just a random person on the street, what is racism? They would say judging somebody based on the color of their skin. or acting on it or doing something based on it, right?
Mhm.
This is different. This is very different. And where did we get this definition from? Well, they sourced it. Number one there, right? Let me click tabs here. Number one, a freaking ethnography opinion piece in a journal started by
Probably the beginning of progressive leftist black activism.
the same guy who had the double vision theory, where you can have a view of society from the way it really is and from where your skin color is. Only if you're black, though, not if you're white, because society is white, so you can only view it from the societal construct. So this is social constructivism at its best right here.
Mhm.
And there are things that are constructed socially, but it's not the end all be all to everything.
Yeah. Racism defined as, no, it's not. You are defining it. Racism as we define it, as our side defines it, as was defined by whoever wrote that essay, that is not the definition of racism.
This is the definition of mental masturbation. Social justice ideology is just fucking itself all over and over and over and over again. Because again, it's an opinion piece in a journal from someone whose opinion has been debated for many years. 1940 was when this was established, and is not established. It is not the correct definition, but they're putting it in the CDC guidelines for this paper. So there's problem number one. Problem number two, we'll go down to the results, was something you already brought up. Perceived racism, right? So this is how I feel versus what actually happened. And this is actually a social construct. So the postmodernists were right. Social constructs are real. And they've made it a point to create an environment where this construct exists. Go back to Cap and his documentary with microaggressions, right? Let me teach you what a microaggression is so you can look for it everywhere you go. But I'm sorry, dude, my resting bitch face because my dryer broke and I have to buy a new one has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
You know, I had a blowout on the way to the store, and I happened to look at you across the peaches in the produce aisle and had a grumpy look on my face. Has nothing to do with you. This whole idea of microaggressions, I'm sorry, it's Western culture. If
First world problems,
first world problems at its finest, because you can just assume, and we all know what the definition of assume is: make an ass out of you and me, right? It's, you can assume the worst out of every little action somebody else that you don't even know is thinking. You're putting words into their mouth, and that bothers me. That has always bothered me.
Yeah.
So we've got perceived. The other part, let's go to the methods. Methods is always where you go. Online survey, that's already a problem. Cluster sampling, that's not that bad, but it was, where was it? Oh, here we go. Participation in this study was voluntary. Each school and teacher decided whether students completed the survey during instructional time or on their own time. This is a big problem. This is not science. This is something you can do on Facebook. Okay.
It's a Twitter poll. They're taking a Twitter poll and putting it in a professional looking paper on the CDC website and declaring that this is science.
Well, it's
This
even
is
worse than that.
authoritative.
It's even worse than that. We're going to have a selection bias. Which teachers are more likely to give this to their students? Which school admins are more likely to give this to their students?
Yeah. People who are inclined to get the result that these people wanted in the first place.
I guarantee the teachers and the admins of those schools believe in
That's the actual definition of racism.
They already are indoctrinated and they already know the answers they're going to get. And people who do not are going to be like, this is silly.
Yeah.
So we do not have a proper sampling of the United States of America. We have a sampling of probably middle class, privileged, mixed race kids. And this is further evidenced by their results with who had the highest. It wasn't black. It was Asian.
This is the self-reporting of perceived racism.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
this was well, and let's add another dimension to it. They don't say racist from who.
Yeah.
If Asian was the highest, who was discriminating?
Well, we talked about those numbers during the Stop Asian Hate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
I'm surprised that episode didn't get pulled down.
Yeah.
But I do want to point out that the breakdown is not broken down by. Remember all those graphs we brought up that did it by race, ethnicity, and everything. They decided to do it differently in 2020. You don't say, probably because a lot of people were and if you want to copy that PDF up there or that URL up there, you can look at this whole document. Yeah, they didn't do everything by race this time around because a lot of people were comparing those numbers and saying, hey, this isn't the narrative you said it was. And all of a sudden everything's done differently. This one is, but it was very vague. There's
just raw population statistics is what that is.
Yeah, that's census stuff right there. And look, the end of the document. Nothing broken down by who's hurting who or who's victimized by who, because people were using that to say, hey, this isn't the narrative you're saying it was. So again, this is just one more example. And again, that was CDC publication of don't be fooled by the same story every time, right? I believe everyone is equal, but I also think you have to open your eyes to it. And I think our immigrants have that. You see it. There's a reason why the Jamaican immigrant doesn't get pulled over more than the white person, whereas the American black does, right? And I think the biggest part of this equation is you're sold. Quit being sold. That's something we can change, and that's something cool, because when you can change something, that means it's not something inherent in you. It means it's something you just got to decide, or you've got to at least open your eyes to. And if that makes me a racist, whatever. Okay, cool. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, then it makes Thomas Sowell a racist because he's been talking about this stuff for decades. You can go back and look at not in 1980. I think I may have shared this clip of when he was on a firing line with William F. Buckley. Go find that. It's a great episode where he's talking about uh, primarily about gender pay uh, inequity, and he's being questioned by a radical feminist lawyer, and he goes over the numbers. He says, look, here are what the demographics say, and one of those demographics that he has repeatedly pulled out is, if America is so racist against blacks, then how come black immigrants not only do better than native blacks, but often do better than whites in certain
Oh yeah,
demographics?
yeah. Nigerian immigrants are near the top
Yeah.
of earning in the United States.
Because if it was all about the color of your skin, then what does the racist care if your family has been living in America for 6 generations, or you just immigrated from Senegal? He doesn't. He's a racist.
You
And
know
yet,
what the argument for that is
Mm,
from the other side, uh, because the immigrants are the best of the best from that area.
yeah, there's a
So,
lot of that.
yeah, well, I mean, there is a little something to that,
Well, that
but at the
that
same
is
time,
used a lot. Yeah.
yeah, there's something to that, but at the same time, it lends strength to my argument because they're the best of the best because of those traits.
Yes.
And if
And,
you're not working on those traits,
and yes, they have certain advantages because of their mental traits that make them immigrants in the first place, but they also have a lot of physical disadvantages in having to move here and having little to no economic or social structure or foundation. So there's a give and take there.
I'm going to use a naughty word in the social justice
Oh no.
realm. Uh, one of the big traits they have is they are accepting of assimilating. Ibram X. Kendi would say assimilation is a form of racism, which, first of all, is racist because that means you're different. If you are born in the United States of America, you are that society. You're not assimilating, you are it. If you move to it, then you have to assimilate. So if you were born here, you're not assimilating, you're just being. And so for someone to tell you you're different just based on your skin color, that's racist. If someone and that's the mentality. That I think that's the driving force that causes these people to be more successful, is they come into the situation with an appreciation of, if I come and become part of this thing, then I have that American dream, because that's why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difference. They tend to be more intelligent, tend to be, have the upper end of a lot of these things, or else they wouldn't be able to come here. But that wasn't always the case. That's not always the case. We see that with we go way back in time. The original, everybody is like, oh, United States was founded on immigration. Well, these were people just escaping a situation they didn't like. My family, the old Polacks, there's just only so much farming room to go around in Poland because it's so fucking cold. And they moved to Texas. I mean, I wonder how much they sweat when they came here, because they came from Poland to Texas. But Poland's fucking cold, by the way. For people out there, it's north of Canada in the latitude, but it's but they're also hard workers. They're also adaptive. The pretty the farmers are pretty resilient in general, and they made a good, we weren't rich or anything, we were still poor, but at the same time probably doing a lot better than they would have been doing in Poland.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's all my brain's got the power for, and I think that's a pretty good place to end it on. So, do you have anything else, or can I go to bed?
I guess you can go to bed. We kind of hit. I think we did all right. I wanted to end fun, but that was pretty depressing episode.
Eh, I feel like it's quasi uplifting to end on the note of, look what others have done with less,
Mhm.
and then, evaluate your own life and see what you can do with yourself.
Well, and to the people that want to keep everything about skin color, there's something uplifting to the fact that you can look to immigrants. Because why is this person more successful?
Mhm.
Why is the Nigerian immigrant more successful than me, or the person from Ghana, or even Jamaica, which we're in the West, but they still came to America. Why is that person more successful than me? And you'll probably find that it's not some immutable characteristic.
Yeah.
It's probably something that you can actually get better at. It's going to take time, take work, take effort. So if you don't like those things, then, well, I'm sorry. See you later. But yeah, if you're willing to, I mean, that's the first step, a little bit of effort, and just open your eyes. That's why I hate downing on the word woke, because we can actually awaken to something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's right there in front of us. We didn't give any advice, no disclaimers needed. I talked about Omicron a little bit, but we didn't give any.
Just showing raw numbers. You can go look that up yourself, folks.
Yeah, go look it up. You can see my URLs in the video. Like, share, subscribe,
All that jazz.
comment. You know what? And if you got a problem with us, comment.
Yeah.
We've gotten some dislikes over the time that are just random, and leave a comment why you disliked it. Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, we're cool. I mean,
Well, critique is a lot of what we do, especially if you've watched any of our fitness episodes.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. If you can't take constructive criticism, that's going to be something that holds you back the rest of your life, no matter what.
oh yeah.
And, it sucks, but I can do it. Heath can do it, I think. And I'm not going to speak for him, but I think he can. And we'll answer to it, because it may or may not be right. And I'm willing to admit I'm wrong. You just better bring evidence.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. Cool.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Next time.